Meow, I'm Hoople's cat. I've read this book and I'm going to review it for you. Spoiler alert, though I will try and keep some of it hidden in case you want to read the book. My partner Kitty, she got this book a while ago and she read it and enjoyed it and said that I would enjoy reading it. And Netflix released a film of it and there was a lot of buzz around the film. I read the book without watching the film. I have unfortunately seen some clips from the film and the trailer, and it looks substantially different and probably worse than the book. But once I finish editing this video and uploaded it, I'm actually going to watch the film and then I'll do another review with spoilers comparing the differences between the film and the text. Right at the beginning, I'm going to say this book's worth reading. It's quite an easy read, it's an interesting read, and I think it's important for everybody to read it, especially for preppers. It gives an insight into disasters that most prepping channels tend to ignore.
Hi readers, my name is Rahman Alam. I'm the author of 3 novels, Rich and Pretty, That Kind of Mother, and my new book, Leave the World Behind. Leave the World Behind is a story about a white, upper middle class Brooklyn family who head out on vacation to a quiet corner of Long Island. Amanda is the mother, Clay is the father, and they have 2 teenage kids, Archie and Rose, and they're excited to just hang out at the beach, laze around by the pool, and have a beautiful end of summer holiday. On their second night in the house, there's a knock at the door, and they find an older black couple standing there. And this couple says that it's their house, and that they've come there because of an emergency happening in Manhattan. From then, the book shifts from being a book about a family on vacation to being a book about 6 strangers brought together under strange and maybe unknowable circumstances. It's a book about paternal love, it's a book about family, it's a book about fate, and it's a book about the state of the world we live in right now.
Amanda and Clay are enjoying a taste of the good life when Ruth and GH, an older couple who claim to own the remote holiday home they're staying in, arrive seeking shelter. These strangers say that a power outage has swept the city, but with no phone service and the internet down, the facts are unknowable. What has happened back in New York? Is the holiday home truly a safe place for their families? And are they safe from one another? Now, I don't know about you, but that kind of a scenario I've encountered before, but this book does it extremely differently, as we shall see. So it sets itself up as a thriller, and indeed it is a thriller, and there's a degree of malevolence throughout the entire book, of fear of something impending that's going to be catastrophic throughout the entire book. But what it never does is use the lazy tropes of person-on-person violence. Person-on-person violence doesn't happen. For Amanda and Clay and their 2 children, Rose and Archie, and for GH and Ruth, his wife, nothing happens ever in the book that tells them what the disaster was. And that's critical in the book. And no, in the last paragraph, they don't suddenly find out. However, we're reading the book. Throughout the book, the unnamed narrator, i.e. the author, tells us little things that tells us, the reader, if we're smart, what actually has happened and what is actually going on. For me, these reveals are a major strength of this book. The very first paragraph of the book shows us normality, but makes us feel uncertain. Well, the sun was shining. They felt that boded well. People turn any old thing into an omen. It was all just to say no clouds were to be seen. The sun where the sun always was. The sun persistent and indifferent. Amanda and Clay and their 2 children drive not very far out of New York to get to an Airbnb, an expensive one that they're treating themselves to because Amanda has just got a promotion in her workplace. $340 American a night. Where is this wilderness they're going to? Long Island. Juxtaposing the normal with the abnormal is what this book is doing. It's not set in the wilderness, it's not set in Alaska, it's set in Long Island, in a very expensive Airbnb. The GPS had no idea where they were, and they had to follow the directions that Amanda, a deft planner, had thought to copy into a notebook. Left, then right, then left, then left, then another mile or so, then left again, then 2 more miles, then right. Not quite lost, but not quite lost. You may have difficulty registering what the author's actually written there. It's actually wonderful. It takes the normal and it's making it abnormal without using tired tropes. So from a prepping point of view, don't rely on your car's GPS, definitely don't rely on your phone's GPS, write directions down. Amanda wants the holiday because she wants to have a last chance to experience her 2 children as children because both of them are on the verge of adulthood. This is particularly wonderful and it's definitely a lesson we should all take on board. And also, but on your deathbed, would you remember the night you took the clients to the old steakhouse on 36th Street and asked after their wives? Or bobbing about in the pool with your kids, dark lashes beaded with chlorinated water? On pages 11 and 12, there's a very detailed and long description of Amanda's shopping at the grocery store which is near to the Airbnb. It's a loving list of things that she's just casually buying with her money because she's on vacation. None of these things are going to be available to her when a disaster happens. We as readers suspect there's going to be a disaster. Amanda has no idea. She bought dried spaghetti and salted butter and a head of garlic. She bought thick cut bacon and £2 bag of flour and $12 maple syrup in a facile glass bottle like tacky perfume. She bought a pound of coffee. It goes on. As readers, we're going to think back to this later on in the book. We're going to think back to the time of pure abundance, easy abundance, stuff from around the world that's actually reasonably priced for most middle-income people. Throughout the book, cell phone and internet addiction is mentioned. She sat, the engine idling, to see if she had cell phone service, and the endorphin rush of arriving emails was almost as sexual as the flutter over the bag boy. As we get into the book, signs of a disaster are starting to appear. The GPS churned, unable to locate itself, or them, or the rest of the world. Without much thinking about it, Clay found the road to the highway and the satellite recovered its hold on them, and they drove under its protective gaze. Now in our car we do have GPS, and in our car we sometimes plug it in, but almost always we have a paper route written down or printed out. It's absolutely important that you don't just use GPS or a cell phone or the internet without thinking day after day, because when it's not there, that's not the time to adapt to it not being there. There's a Starbucks. The shop was the same as all locations of a chain tend to be, but wasn't that comforting? She played a podcast on the computer. Something to do with her mind. She barely paid attention to it. Amanda did the New York Times crossword on her phone. She was afraid of dementia and felt this was preventative, and the time passed strangely, as it did when measured in minutes before the television. I hope you're picking up the sense of unease throughout this book. Time passes strangely. Of note, dementia is not at all prevented by doing crossword puzzles, but crossword puzzles are kind of fun. Clay changed the channels, pausing a moment on Rachel Maddow, and then switching to a thriller that neither of them were able to follow, detectives and their prey. Television is idiotic, Clay turned it off. He'd rather play with his phone. In a world of abundance, in a world of electronic media, we can get sucked into it, and in fact we should get sucked into it because it has some powerful goods for us. But if it becomes our motivation for how we navigate through our life, what happens when it ends? At the end of chapter 6, we suddenly get the external world intruding itself upon the paradise of the Airbnb. There was a knock at the door of this house, where no one knew they were, not even the global positioning system. This house near the ocean, but also lost in farmland. This house of red bricks painted white, the very material the smartest little piggy chose because it would keep him safest. There was a knock at the door. What were they supposed to do? Amanda stood frozen, a prey's instinct. Gather your thoughts. Get a bat, the old solution. Violence. A bat? Clay pictured the flying mammal. A bat? He understood then, but where would he get a bat? When had he last held a bat? Did they even have a baseball bat at home, and if they did, had they brought it on vacation? No, but when had they decided to forsake that American diversion? In their foyer on Baltic Street, they had a clutch of umbrellas of varying degrees of broken, an extra windshield scraper, Archie's lacrosse stick, some of those circulars, never asked for, a sheath of coupons in rainproof plastic that would never biodegrade. Well, lacrosse was from the Indians, maybe that was more all-American. On a console table, beneath a framed photograph of Coney Island, there was a brass object, an artful little talk, the kind of made-in-China geejaw meant to add character to hotel rooms or model apartments. He picked it up, but found it weighed nothing. Besides, what would he do? Wrap his fingers around it? Strike some stranger in the head? He was a professor. This was ridiculous. I don't know. Clay put the little objet d'art back in its place. Art could not protect them. So they do open the door, and there's GH and Ruth. GH is a man, he's black, and he's in his 60s. He's kind of attractive, but he's a bit small. Ruth is an older lady of indeterminate age, and she's also black. She's wearing boxy clothing. The narrator lets us know throughout this that GH and Ruth are actually smart, are actually calculating, and are actually thinking about how they're going to get access to the house. The woman shivered. Her linen clothes could not keep her warm. She seemed pitiable, elderly, ill-prepared. She was smart, and she'd been counting on this. Wow, menace. Of note, try not to wear linen or cotton clothing. It's really not a good idea, especially when it rains or it's cold. The plot then establishes that there's something very wrong. We'd have called, you see, but the phones. As I said, I would have called, but there was no service. Now Amanda decides to check up on her children, a mother's instinct. I'm not quite sure why she does this at this juncture, but it's kind of a normal response. And that's what the book does. It's taking normal people, putting them in a strange, unclear environment and watching them flail. As they flail, our uncertainty increases. Down the dark hall, Amanda used a cell phone as a light. Again, the importance of the cell phone, again, the importance of the internet. Amanda pressed the home button, and it lit up, showing her a news alert, the barely legible T of the New York Times, and only a few words. Major blackout reported on the east coast of the United States. She jabbed at it, but the application didn't open. Just the white screen of the thinking machine. GH and Ruth then explained where they were and how they ended up back at their holiday home. They'd been at a concert, they were driving back home, and then something happened. Of course, Amanda knows, she says, a blackout, and they're all impressed with how she knew. I got a news alert. Amanda took a phone from her pocket and put it on the counter. What did it say? Ruth wanted more information. She'd seen it with her own eyes, but knew nothing. Did it say why? Just that. There was a blackout on the East Coast. She looked at the phone again, but the alert was gone and she didn't know how to return to it. It's windy outside. Clay felt the cause and effect were clear. Don't underestimate a person's ability to rationalise away disaster and disaster response. Clay is normal. What he's doing is normal. He can't deal with it, so he puts it in a box marked, this is normal, I'm okay. We do this all the time. It's one of the main reasons people prep. They want a sense of control from an uncontrolled world. The uncontrolled world frightens them. They don't have money, they don't have power. A lot of them don't even have good looks, judging by a lot of prepper channels. So they make believe that they can survive a disaster and live forever and then be powerful after the event. This, of course, is denial, and it's not going to be that way for any of us. What we can do is do emergency preparedness training and get some stuff that's smart and sensible that we can use to make our lives a little bit safer and the people around us a little bit safer in the event of a major disaster. But most people are just going to explain it away by magical thinking. Human-caused climate change is seriously causing problems all across the globe this year. We're all aware of it. Magical thinking, blame it on HARP, blame it on chemtrails, blame it on the World Economic Forum, pretend it doesn't even exist, pretend it's normal. All of these coping mechanisms are really bad for you in a disaster. You have to understand what the nature of the disaster is and you have to act accordingly. When there's a disaster in this book, they don't know what the disaster is, but they know there's been a blackout. That should trigger them into action, that should trigger them into preparedness. It doesn't, they're normal people. The world tries to tell them what's going on. Immediately thereafter the lights flickered, not once, not twice, 4 times, like a message in Morse they had to decipher, like a succession of flashbulbs, but it held steady, it held course. The light held the night at bay. The 4 of them breathed in sharply, all 4 of them exhaled. Of course, America has an emergency broadcast system, so they'd alert people to what's going on. We heard the emergency broadcast system. Ruth thought this explained a great deal. I thought to turn on the radio. This is the emergency broadcast system. The tone was not mocking but faithful, sounding the right stress and intonation. Not a test. Do you understand? Not, this is only a test. That's the only way I've ever heard it. So I didn't even notice it at first, but I kept listening and heard it again. This is the emergency broadcast system. Emergency? Amanda was trying to be logical, but of course a blackout is a kind of emergency. As most people would do, confronted with this situation, they put off dealing with it. Then tomorrow we'll know a little more. We'll figure it out. Did not commit to leaving, which was important. We now start to get little bits of the actual story, the bigger picture, the world's story. Amanda crossed her arms against her chest. She was right in that she didn't know the whole story, nor did Clay, nor did the people in the kitchen, nor did the junior editor who, seeing the news cross the wire, issued the alert to the millions of people who had the New York Times app installed on their phones. The wind was so fierce, but even if it hadn't been, they likely would have just been too far from the flight path to hear the first planes dispatched to the coast, per protocol in that situation. Eek. Something big happened. Now, they used the television, and it's not very helpful. Ruth scrolled through every available channel. All blues, those meaningless words. This is some sort of emergency broadcast system we've got. Got to admire Clay's ability to completely rationalise panic away. Amanda, on the other hand, Amanda didn't believe this. She also wondered, should they fill the bathtub with water? Should they find batteries, candles and supplies? Yes, she thinks about being prepared, but she doesn't act. Whether you rationalise away fear, like Clay's doing, and make it disappear because it's nothing much, or whether you think of it as an overwhelming thing and you have to start doing stuff, but so much stuff that you've never done before you don't do anything, both aren't really great in a disaster. GH didn't want to say that he'd known something was coming. His business was clairvoyance. You looked at the yield curve arching and slumping like an inchworm making its inefficient progress, and it told you everything you needed to know. He had known not to trust that particular parabola. It was more than portent. It was promise. Something was upon them. It had been decreed. I think GH is a hedge fund manager or similar. He manages other people's money and makes it grow for them. He knew something big was happening. He saw the shock in the market before the shock arrived. Now GH is an older, rich male. He's meant to be okay, he's meant to be the protagonist, he's meant to be the saviour. The author has subverted that somewhat by making him both black and also a guest, an unwanted guest, in his own sanctuary. GH flicked on the lights, forgetting to pause in gratitude that they still worked. There was a big closet, a cachet of Duracells, a flat of Volvic, some bags of Rancho Gordo beans, boxes of Cliff Bars and Barilla Fusilli sawed in a heavy-duty plastic bin because there were mice in the country, cans of tuna, gasoline canisters worth of olive oil, a cheap case of Malbec that was not half bad, bed linens in those vacuum bags that sucked out all the air. The two of them could live comfortably housebound for a month, if not longer. GH practically dared a snowstorm to arrive, but so far none had. They said that was global warming. Everything in order. So he has got some prep, so he feels ahead of the curve, and he's able to deal with the emergency. His preps are fairly unsubstantial for what he may be facing, but at the same time he does have things other people don't have, which is fairly in-depth stores of some stuff that's going to run out really quickly. But very much like Clay's rationalise and forget the danger, or Amanda's panic and over-plan but don't act rationalisation of the danger, GH exhibits a prepper's rationalisation. What do I mean? We're here. He paused because it was important to remember. It's safe here. He thought of his canned tomatoes. There was enough to last them for months. So there's been a massive blackout over the eastern part of the United States of America. They don't know, but we know. Planes have been dispersed to the coast in case it's an enemy attack. Canned tomatoes are a good idea. But that and his other preps in no way make him safe. The prepper fantasy of safety is a fantasy. We now start to get introduced to Rose, the younger daughter. Mom. Rose was wide awake. Rose restored by night. Rose abloom. It had been that way her whole life. Mornings she was dying to do. She opened her eyes and jumped to the floor. When you're the younger child, you learn to fend for yourself. Mom, there's something wrong with the TV. Honey, this is not an emergency. Then she remembered. Rose has noticed that the TV's not functioning properly. It's all messed up. The first few channels were all black and white dancing light. After that, all white. Nothing. Can you fix it? Rose was still young enough to believe that her parents could fix anything. Rose stomped away, that was how she walked, and Amanda picked up her phone. The screen woke up, happy to see her, and she was happy too. Not one news alert, but 4. And just as before, she couldn't see more than the dispatch. She pressed on the alert and the screen tried and failed to connect. The same headline. Major blackout reported on the East Coast United States. Then, Hurricane Farah makes landfall in North Carolina. Then, breaking, East Coast United States reports power failure. Then a final breaking, followed by nonsensical letters. Both Amanda and Clay deny reality of what she's just seen on her phone. I'm not going to go into it, but it's an interesting give and take. They both back each other up and contradict each other in a way that makes both of them feel it's okay. It is, of course, not okay. Rose saw a deer with abbreviated velvet antlers and a cautious yet somehow bored mien, considering her through the dark, savagely human eyes. She wanted to say a deer, but there was no one there to hear her, so she looked over her shoulder to the house and saw her parents talking. She wasn't supposed to go in the pool, but she wasn't going in the pool. She walked down the steps onto the damp grass and the deer just watched her, barely curious. She hadn't even seen that there was another beside it. No more. There were 5 deer. There were 7. Every time Rose adjusted her eyes to try and understand what she was seeing something new. There were dozens of deer. Had she been higher up, she'd have understood that there were hundreds, more than 1,000, more than that even. She wanted to run inside and tell her parents, but she also just wanted to stand there and see it. So the deer are basically responding to what they sense, as are the trees, as we shall find out. In the absence of new information, people repeat the old information ad nauseum, and even worse, then they start to fantasize. In a major disaster, stick to what's known, deal with what you need to deal with. If it's a blackout, whatever the cause, there's a certain number of things you should do. And in this book, nobody has yet done anything about the blackout in terms of preparing for it to be an ongoing one. Every time there's a blackout in your area, the lights may never come back on again. People aren't ready for that. The same thing, a blackout, then something about the hurricane, then an update, and then something that was just gibberish. This was the 3rd time she'd explained it. The information felt even more meaningless now. She hadn't been raised to do, though that had been expected, but to convince. This was, her mother understood, how women made their way in the world, convincing men to do the things they wanted. I'm scared, she was confessing. Maya and the boys, she's probably trying to call us. Our daughter, GH explained. Put a hand on his wife's shoulder. Don't worry about that now. GH is controlling the situation because he doesn't want to have panic. If it's not under control, it's chaos. Certain types of personality are going to really focus on not panicking. She should be worried about the kids. Now, for various reasons, Clay decides to drive into town to find out what's going on. Way late into what's going on, but that's what they come up with. He goes on his own, even though he doesn't know the area, and he's a bit of a dud. There was a field of something being cultivated, but Clay had no idea what it was. Were soybeans the same thing as edamame, or were they something else? And what could they be used for? Well, if the power never comes back on again, you better find out. But it also shows how disconnected people are in the modern world from their food, from their natural environment, from deer. Our devices have made us more interconnected than ever before with the world around us, but in ways that separate us fundamentally from both each other and from nature. Clay looked at his phone. Habit was powerful. It showed him nothing. There were directions written down in Amanda's notebook, of course, but Amanda's notebook was back at the house in Amanda's Vuitton bag. Anyway, the ability to take written directions to one destination and simply invert them to move in the reverse was an obsolete art. It was like winding the car windows down with a crank. Human progress. Clay was lost. You used to have to do this in a car to make the window go up or down. It was literally a lever and you had to turn it. There were no other cars, he didn't know if that seemed odd or not. He is out of his normal environment, but this can happen to you anywhere. For example, a lot of people talk about using side roads to evacuate from cities in a major disaster, not understanding that side roads are going to be as congested as the main roads, and you probably need to walk out or bike out. But at the same time, if you're not used to going through an area, even of your own city or town, it can be fundamentally disorientating to try that after a disaster's hit. You should be extremely familiar with your local environment. About halfway through the book, Amanda realises that she's absolutely as useless as Clay. Without our phones, it turns out we're basically marooned here. That was it. The feeling was withdrawal. On planes, she turned off airplane mode, started trying to check her email once she heard that ding that meant you were fewer than 10,000 feet aloft. The flight attendants were buckled in and couldn't scold. She'd pull and pull and pull at the screen, waiting for the connection to be established, waiting to see what she'd missed. The dependency on modern technology that Amanda's showing is not that uncommon. We might like to feel that we're above her, but basically, for certain aspects of life, we're as dependent on technology we don't understand as Amanda is. Ruth says to her, "You'll believe it when you see it on your phone." And isn't that the sad truth? People don't believe anything anymore unless they see it on their favourite news site or their favourite app or on whatever. People no longer are able to critically think. Rose and her older brother Archie head off into the forest, and Rose tries to tell Archie about the deer. He doesn't understand what she's trying to say, and he's not prepared to listen. They wanted something to happen, but something was happening. They did not know it, and it did not involve them, not really. It would, of course. The world belonged to the young. Having seen how Amanda and Clay and GH and Ruth are actually dealing with this emergency, the unknown narrator here is probably right. I can't see any of them surviving for a long period of time. Still lost in the car, still trying to find the grocery store that he can't find, Clay comes to a decision. Their vacation was ruined, the spell was broken. Truly what you should do is drive out to the house and have the kids pack their things. They'd be back in the city before dinner. They could splurge at the French place on Atlantic, order a fried anchovy, steak and martini. Clay was only decisive after the fact. And now he was, well, he could say turned around, not lost. He felt a strange, powerful desire to see his children. In a disaster, making decisions is a critical skill. Making decisions based on what happened before the disaster is a death trap. Now I know because I've seen a clip and I managed to turn it off that Clay, whilst he's out driving lost, does encounter a lady who speaks Spanish. And that is in fact from the book. But she was panicked and she was panicking him. He was lost and wanted his family. He wanted a steak at that restaurant on Atlantic Avenue. No Spanish. She said something more, something. He heard beer, but she said dear. And they sounded alike in both tongues. She said more, she said telephone, but he didn't understand. She said electric, but he didn't hear. Tears welled at the corner of her small eyes. She was short, freckled, broad. She could have been 14 or 40. Her nose was running. She was weeping. She spoke louder, hurried for imprecise, maybe laxing out of Spanish altogether into some dialect, something still more ancient, the argot of civilizations long dead. Piles of rubble and jungle. Her people discovered corn, tobacco, chocolate. Her people invented astronomy, language, trade. Then they'd cease to be. Now that's a bit of a forewarning for us, isn't it? We like to think that we are going to be immortal. Truth is, history says, I'm sorry, he shook his head. If his phone had worked, he might have tried Google Translate. He needed to be away from her even more than he needed to be with his family. Clay cannot cope with what's going on. She is having a meltdown about whatever's going on. She obviously knows more than he does. And he just has to get away from her. He can't have his normalcy destroyed by the reality of the environment he's now in. In disaster situations, people do incredibly dumb things. They'll literally sit around for 3 hours on the Titanic drinking scotch, knowing it's going to sink, make no efforts to build a boat, can be done if you act quickly enough and understand the situation. When you just want to get away from the situation or you don't want the situation to happen, that's the death trap. The trees were watching and not impartially. The trees knew what was up. The trees talked among themselves. They were sensitive to the seismic reverberations of bombs far distant. Trees miles away where the ocean had begun to breach the land were dying, though it would take years for them to be reduced to albino logs. The trees had all the time the rest of us do not have. The mangoes could outsmart it, pull up their roots like a Victorian lady's skirt, sip the salt from the ground, so maybe they'd be fine, with the alligators and the rats and the roaches and the snakes. Maybe they'd be better off without us. Sometimes suicide is a relief. That is the right noun for what was happening. The sickness in the ground and in the air and in the water was all a clever design. There was a menace in the woods, and Rose could feel it, and another child would have called it God. Did it matter if a storm had metastasized into something which no noun yet existed? Did it matter if the electrical grid broke apart like something built of Lego? Did it matter if Lego would never biodegrade, would outlast Notre Dame, the pyramids of Giza, the pigment daubed on the walls of Lascaux? Did it matter if some nation claimed responsibility for the outrage? Did it matter that it was condemned as an act of war? Did it matter if this was a pretext for retaliation long hoped for? Did it matter that proving who had done it via wires and networks was actually impossible? We had little tidbits of stuff, now we're going to get hit on the head. Did it matter if an asthmatic woman named Deborah died after 6 hours trapped on an F train stalled beneath the East River, and that the other people on the subway walked past her body and felt nothing in particular? Did it matter that machines meant for supporting life ceased doing the hard work after failure of backup generators in Miami, in Atlanta, in Charlotte, in Annapolis? Did it matter if the morbidly obese grandson of the eternal president actually did send a bomb? Or did it matter simply that he could, if he wanted to? Not fully stated, but it is implying that North Korea has in fact launched a bomb on the United States of America. We do know that in South Carolina there's been a super hurricane that's landed and it's causing widespread devastation. Archie, the teenage son, he has a small role in the book. It's not really a critical role, but it's an interesting role, and I think the author captured the character of Archie quite well. He didn't feel the tick burrowing into his ankle any more than he could Earth's deliberate daily rotation. He didn't feel anything in the air because it felt unchanged. This is the only real clue as we get to why Archie falls sick, and spoiler, he's going to fall sick. She was sitting there not doing anything more when it happened, when there was something, a noise, but that didn't cover it. Noise was an insufficient noun, or maybe noise was always impossible to describe in words. What was music but noise? Could words get at Beethoven? This was a noise, yes, but one so loud it was almost a physical presence, so sudden because of course there was no precedent. There was nothing, real life, and then there was noise. Of course they'd never heard a noise like that before. You didn't hear such a noise, you experienced it, endured it, survived it, witnessed it. You could fairly say that their lives could be divided into two. The period before they heard that noise and the period after. It was a noise, but it was a transformation. It was a noise, but it was a confirmation. Something had happened. Something was happening. It was ongoing. The noise was confirmation, even as the noise was mystery. Don't worry, the noise is going to be explained. It's an absolute critical part of this. The noise bade those deer, more than 1,000 in number, already heedless of the property lines drawn by men, to stampede through gardens without even stopping for a nibble. Homeowners were too distracted by the shattered windows, by the screaming children, by the infant eardrums, irreparably affected, to gawk at all those animals. They actually discuss what the noise is, and they kind of touch upon it and then reject it. They think it might be a plane going through the sound barrier. During the conversation, GH does tell them something that's very important. I noticed today, did you? There was no air traffic, not one plane, not one helicopter. GH knew as his wife said it that this was true. You're right. I mean, usually we hear so many. Planes, helicopters. What do you mean? Amanda asked. There must have been. Rather than discuss this piece of news, Amanda gets rid of her children because she doesn't want them around the news, and then she kind of flails again. They then have an interesting conversation about preps and about what's going on, and basically it's all kind of futile. Amanda was furious. We don't have the internet. We don't have our phones. We don't know what anything is. She blamed it on these people. They knocked on the door and ruined everything. Amanda does go through the stages of grief here. I'm not going through all of them. It's kind of fascinating. Amanda wept more now. But we won't know what is happening until we do. Maybe the television will come back on. Ruth tried to sound optimistic. Or our cell phones will work again. Amanda said it like a prayer. Meanwhile, Clay in his car, lost, is having an epiphany. Masculine responsibility, Clay realised, was utter bullshit. Clay idled there because there was no traffic to block. He waited 8 minutes, sure the noise would come back. It did, but over Queens, distant enough that he couldn't hear it. Solitude made the noise unbearable for Clay, but so did its opposite. In Queens, crowds formed and panic metastasized. People ran, people wept. The police barely bothered to pretend to do anything. While everybody at the Airbnb is basically going through some form of denial, either prep denial or outright denial or panic denial, whatever it is, Rose is not. She didn't want to hide in bed. Rose didn't want to hide at all. She stood up and stretched as you might after a restorative night's sleep. She stretched her arms and legs and they both felt powerful and alive. Rose walked to the window and tried to see into the trees. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but she would know it when it appeared, and knew too that it would appear. Television would have been palliative. Television would have stunned them, entertained them, informed them, or helped them forget. We need to fill the bathtubs. Amanda wasn't sure what was required. She was guessing. Fill the bathtubs? Clay took it for a figure of speech. She lowered her voice. In case. The water. Does the water not run if the power goes out? Clay had no idea. It did not. The next day, or the day after that, certainly the day following that one, some residents in the uppermost apartments in Manhattan would fall into delirium that presaged their eventual dehydration. Archie, feeling okay? He exhaled slowly, a long and tremulous breath. He did not know where he was. He did not understand what was happening. He sat up. This movement abrupt too. He opened his mouth, not to speak, but to move his jaw, which hurt. Of which he was unaware. In some way that seemed new or different or wrong. I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? She pulled the duvet back, revealing his thin frame, releasing the radiant heat of his body, so powerful she could feel it without laying hands on him. Archie? He made a sound, like a hum. He leaned forward and vomited on his own lap. Now I'm going to have to say, he has been bitten by a tick. This is pretty quick for a tick to actually cause this sort of a response. In fact, I don't think it would cause a response like this. And for me, it's never really explained why he gets sick. It was too intimate. But Ruth had foresight. It would save them the trek to the laundromat when they got home. Amanda did not know that the laundromat was closed. She did not know that the Chinese man who ran it was inside the elevator that carried passengers between the turnstiles and the platform at the R station in Brooklyn Heights. And he'd been there for hours. And he'd died there. Though that was many hours in the future yet. So this is a massive and ongoing major disaster. What if it was a war, big enough to ensnare the world? The national borders became like castle walls. She didn't know that it was worse. That war could not describe it. Those planes had been sent from Rome, New York to meet another approaching from Western Africa. Bad intelligence. They ended up killing 400 odd souls before they got near enough our borders to have to fill out their immigration paperwork. The pace of things used to be slower. Now a nut didn't have to shoot an archduke. Every day was a jumble of near simultaneous oddity. I'm not altogether sure why that's in the book. I don't think it really helps the book, and I don't even think it's kind of sane. There's very few people who immigrate into America from Africa on boats. So after several days, the power's still on and they still have kibble and food. And they also crucially have alcohol. So none of them are doing anything at all to actually get ready for what is an ongoing disaster. But then they decide to act. I'm packing. We're not coming back here. We're going home. Clay understood her insistence. If they thought it would be so. He took clean underpants from the chest of drawers and placed them atop the bed. It's been a strange day. I need reality. Amanda sat on the bed. A day that felt like a week. Could it be that we're addicted to our phones? Like an actual addiction? Because I feel unwell. Clay was charging his, wanted to be sure it was ready when the network came back online. Amanda fretted. What if that noise made us sick? It might be possible. Get home. Get back to what is known. Now they've been sitting around on their duff for like about 48 hours at this point, so that might not be feasible. It may not even be sensible. What we as the reader know, but they don't know, what is going on in New York, really means you should think twice before going there. That's a flamingo. She said it even though it was obvious. A pink bird was a flamingo. It was so specific. The comma of its beak, the forte mark of its illogical neck, that a toddler would know it. That's a flamingo? That's a flamingo. With his fingertips, G.H. rubbed the steam from his glasses. They did not know what was happening in the world, but they knew that. The flamingo beat its wings more. They let their eyes adjust, and they could see another flamingo. No, 2. No, 3. No, 4. No, 5. No, 6. Strutting on the lawn with their backward gait. We've already seen the deer migrate out of the area en masse, which is a clear and absolute sign that perhaps you should. Now flamingos are turning up. They rationalize the flamingo's presence. Of course they do. Escape from a zoo, escape from some rich person's menagerie. Who knows? Truth will be revealed. But first, that horrible noise. They were quiet, like they knew it was coming. It came. The same noise? Sure. Yes, probably. Why not? Who knew? Once, twice, 3 times. The window over the sink cracked. The pendant light over the counter did too. The electricity probably should have turned off, but it didn't. No one would ever be able to answer precisely why. The noises overlapped, but were discrete. The sound, they didn't know this, of American planes in the American sky, speeding towards the American future. A plane most people didn't know existed. A plane designed to do unspeakable things, heading off to do them. Every action had an equal and opposite reaction, and there were more actions and reactions than could be counted on the party's 8 hands. What their government was up to? What the other governments were up to? Just an abstract way of talking about the choices of a handful of men. Lemmings were not suicidal, they were driven to migrate and overconfident about their ability. The leader of the pack was not to blame. They all plunged into the sea, thinking it was easy to traverse as a puddle. So human an instinct in a bunch of rodents. Millions of Americans huddled at home in the dark, but only thousands of them heard the noises and comforted children and one another and wondered just what they were. Some people got sick because that was just their constitution. Others listened and realised how little they'd understood about their world. This is literally a great unplugging of civilization. We now know that American planes are going supersonic over America repeatedly, trying to intercept foreign planes or foreign missiles. For as confident as we all are in our modern technology and our ability to cope with the absence of it, modern military strategy is very confident that they can cope with whatever is thrown at them. History shows that confidence is always misplaced eventually. That noise again, it was the final one. It was one of the last planes. The insects outside fell silent, baffled. The bats that hadn't succumbed to white nose syndrome fell from the sky. The flamingos barely paid it mind. They had enough to worry about. After a heavy evening of drinking and doing very little to prepare for this, Amanda wakes up and is quite sick the next day, vomiting. Is it radiation sickness? Is it a bacterial infection? Is it a bioweapon? Or is she just hungover? Clay also has problems the next morning. His are of the diarrhea type. Did he know if this was a hangover or a symptom of something worse? He did not. Again, the uncertainty, the lack of concrete information, it's really unhinging for the characters in this book, but also for the reader reading this, even though again we're getting things to hang on what's going on in the external world. The world that's been left behind, we have a kind of an idea about. People in the book have no idea. Archie gets very sick, then he starts to feel a lot better, and then his teeth start to fall out. It kind of reminds me of radiation sickness. But the problem is, if Archie's had a dose that bad, why is Rose not affected? Nobody else is particularly sick. The diarrhea and the vomiting are easily explained by the amount of alcohol they consumed. Why has just Archie got this? It's interesting. It's not his constitution. Your constitution's not going to have your teeth fall out within 24 hours. Didn't make any sense when I read the book. Still doesn't make any sense. But let's get over that. Did you fill the bathtub? Amanda was doing what she was able to. It's an emergency. We will need water. Now, if you have a water bob, by all means go ahead and fill the bathtub. And if you don't have a water bob, by all means go and fill the bathtub. But it's not really going to be potable, drinkable, after about 72 hours or so. What you need to do is fill every single available container you can possibly find, including decorative vases, with water. And if you have cling film, cover all the surfaces if you don't have lids. In an emergency where there's been a blackout, even if you still have power, you want to consider what will happen when the power fails, and what will happen is the water eventually will stop pumping. Water's a critical result. It's much more critical than canned tomatoes. Of course, you also need canned tomatoes, but thirst will kill you a lot faster. Now, Archie gets really sick, and he collapses, in fact. They're actually looking for Rose, who's disappeared. Dad actually looked at him and then leaned forward and vomited once more. A beautiful plash of liquid onto the earth. What's happened? GH was demanding an explanation. You're all right. You're all right. Pretty obvious denial of circumstance. Ruth, however, is doing something that they probably should have done 48 hours beforehand. Ruth was cataloguing. They had old antibiotics. They had a hot water bottle. They had that powder drink for when you were down with flu. You dissolved it in hot water and slept for hours. They had sea salt and olive oil and basil, and laundry detergent and band-aids, and a huge package of those little travel packages of tissues that were so handy to have in your purse. George had $10,000 in cash tucked away for emergencies. They were rich. Would any of that be a salve to what this was? Well, the answer is no. Obviously, some of that stuff's useful to have. But if there's a major disaster like this, the point of having cash on hand is to spend it as fast as possible to get supplies, while people are still unaware enough to sell it to you for cash. The ATMs are down, the internet's down, you can't use credit cards or debit cards, but if you throw some cash at them, they might let you buy stuff in their convenience store until they know what's going on, in which case you're not going to be buying anything. However, like I said, a couple of days have gone by. The unnamed narrator actually mentions quite often towards the end of the book things that are going to happen much further in the future than where the book is set. None of the men in the car noticed the little egg shack. None of them knew that Amanda was inside it, finding instead of Rosie only the goodly scent of farm labour. The Mudds, whose land that was, would never again bring fresh laid eggs back to that little shed. Whatever this is, it's going to be long and it's going to be terrible. Clay has another epiphany. I didn't know what to do. I can't do anything without my phone. I'm a useless man. My son is sick and my daughter is missing and I don't know what I'm supposed to do right now in this moment right here. I have no idea what to do. His eyes horribly damp. Clay tried for composure. He swallowed the sob like it was a burp. He was so small. GH has a plan. That plan is a guy. George couldn't explain his faith that Danny. We need to stop. We're going to Danny's house. Whose house? George couldn't explain his faith that Danny, of all people, would understand what was happening and have, if not a solution, a strategy. That's the kind of man he was. They could go to Danny and say the girl was missing or the boy was sick, or they were all afraid of the noises in the night, and Danny, like the Wizard of Oz, could grant good health and safe passage. Danny was our contractor. He's our neighbour. He's a friend. That's an interesting viewpoint. Danny's also appeared earlier on. Ruth is talking about how GH is enamoured with Danny the contractor and how most of the house was designed by Danny. The ideas that they incorporated were Danny's ideas. Danny literally used his hands and his technical know-how with their cash to build their house for them in a way that Danny wanted it to be built. They're happy with that. But like cell phones and the internet, it means they're actually fundamentally disconnected from the entire thing. Danny was in the kitchen, taking stock of what they had on hand, and was irritated by the interruption. That was evidence as he opened the doors. Once he'd seen the news alert, Danny had gone out for supplies, for news. He'd come home with groceries, but little else. This is a surprise. GH could see he'd miscalculated. Danny went on. I'm surprised you guys are out. What do you mean? GH was trying to get something, anything. What do I mean? Danny's laugh was hard and angry. There's real shit going on out there, George. You don't know that? You can't hear it from that nice house of yours? My guys did a good job, but I know you heard it last night. My family is renting George's house. We're here from the city. Clay didn't know why he was trying to explain himself. He couldn't understand how little Danny was interested. That's a lucky break for your family. Danny knew the man was from the city. It was clear. He did not care. Can you imagine what a shit show that must be? What do you know? Have you heard anything? George asked. And that's always going to be a critical question. People are always going to ask that. What do you know? What have you seen? People like to talk. They like to create the narrative. If they have a narrative, they have a role within the narrative, they feel safe. In a massive disaster like this, forget the narrative, get prepping. I know what you probably know, Danny sighed, impatient. Apple News says there's a blackout. I think, okay, we're safe out here. I've got no service, I've got no cable, but I've got power. So I drive into town for some stuff. I think the store's going to be mobbed, right? Nope, quiet. Not like before a snowstorm, more like after a foot has fallen. No one knows what's going on, it's just another day. I come home, I hear that noise and think, that's it, we're not leaving. Then last night, the noise again, 3 times. Bombers, missiles, I don't know. But I'm staying put until I hear that I shouldn't. You went to the store, George wanted to be clear. Stocked up, came home. It doesn't feel like out there is a place to be. My son is sick. Clay didn't know how to explain that something had knocked the teeth from Archie's 16-year-old mouth. It made no sense. He was vomiting. He seems okay now. Clay was still hopeful. GH interjected. He lost his teeth, 5 of them. They just fell out, we can't explain it. His teeth? Danny was quiet for a while. You think it has something to do with that noise? Danny did not know that the teeth in Karen's mouth were themselves loose and would soon fall out. Again, it's puzzling me in a radiation type event. It's going to be a lot of people ill. It's not just going to be 1 or 2 people. It's going to be everybody's going to feel pretty sick at this point. It won't just be Archie and Karen. George understood why Danny had closed the door at his back. George had expected human communion, but he forgot what humans were actually like. I thought it was the right thing to do, seek medical attention. Danny was not smiling. That's the old way, George. You're not thinking clearly. There is no help, Danny was saying. They had misunderstood what kind of person he was. They had misunderstood people. I don't know what you're going to do. I'd do anything I had to for my daughter, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm locking the doors, getting out my gun, I'm waiting, I'm watching. Was the mention of a gun a threat? GH understood it as one. We shouldn't go to the hospital? I don't have any answers for you guys, I'm sorry. This apology was almost a remembered instinct, but Danny was sorry, for all of them. He shared what information he had. Yesterday I saw deer from the kitchen. GH nodded. Deer were everywhere out there. Danny clarified, not deer, not a family of deer, a migration. I've never seen so many in my life. 100, 200, couldn't even guess. There was more than that. The eye couldn't take them all in, couldn't find them in the shadows of the trees. Only the people who knew such things knew that there were around 36,000 deer in the county. They were not the deer Rose had seen on their way to join those. A mass migration, a disaster response, a disaster indicator, a disaster unfolding. In what is almost a running joke, bathtub. Danny offered some advice. I think you should get back in your car and drive to your house. Leave, also leave me alone. That's the only thing I got for you. Hunker down, lock the door, and we didn't have a plan beyond that. Fill the bathtub, store water, take stock of your food, see what supplies you have. So I'm not really impressed with any of this bunch. Danny's kind of got on the right track here, and the rest of them, I don't know. I would actually hate to be saddled with these people in this scenario, because really they're fundamentally flawed. And we can go on ad nauseum about what they should have done, but I think what they did was fairly normal. That's the scary part. That's why the book's a great book to read, because you might have a prepper mindset, or you might not. But it's important to see what normal people are expected to do and might do in a sudden and very dramatic disaster. They become unhinged. However, the youngest one of the bunch, Rose, she does not become unhinged. She adapts to a new reality. Almost instantaneously, she realizes there's something to adapt to. Rose had woken with conviction. That's what it was to be a kid. But also she had a mission. If she had looked back, Lot's wife, Rose might have seen a flamingo, pink and furious, flying through the air. The truth, they'd blown in on the winds, one of evolution's old tricks. Stowaway lizards on a log, swept to sea like Noah and Esma, might make landfall on some new shore and get busy getting busy, their descendants devastating native foliage. The flamingos were as angry as the humans to find themselves there, but they'd have to make do. They'd have to suss out some algae. They nested once a year, but that was all it took. And maybe 1,000 generations from then they'd be inbred, some of a crazy colour, antifreeze blue from sipping swimming pools, some new species. Maybe they'd be all that would be left. Leave the world behind. What world are we leaving behind? The world of civilization, or the world that's out there beyond the Airbnb? I think both. But are you not curious as to what's going on in the world? A time zone away it was still dark, but then it was dark in so many places. Some people were committing suicide. Some people were packing things up in cars and hoping they'd be able to get a mile or 2 or 10 or wherever it would take to reach wherever safety endured. Some people thought they'd crossed the border, not realising that such lines are imaginary. Some people didn't know anything was amiss. There were towns in New Mexico and Idaho where nothing had happened yet, though it was odd how no one could seem to talk to their satellites overhead. People still went to jobs that in time they would see were wholly useless, selling potted plants or making up hotel beds. Governors declared states of emergency but couldn't figure out how to tell anyone. Some people started to realise that they had a naive faith in the system. Some people tried to maintain that system. Some people were vindicated they stockpiled guns and those filter straws that make any water safe to drink. However much had happened, so much more would happen. The leader of the free world was sequestered beneath the White House, but no one cared about him. Certainly not a little girl tripping through the woods and thinking about Harry Styles. Rose has re-entered the forest. Rose is on a mission. Rose was a survivor and would survive. She knew by some instinct, maybe just a human connection, that she was in the minority. Somewhere south, levees had ceded to the river. Waters rose to the second-story bedrooms and people made their way to attics and rooftops. In Philadelphia, a woman delivering for the 3rd time, a son to be named for her brother, killed while deployed in Tehran, felt the baby on her chest just as the hospital lost power. So it was like the blackout was due to the shock of his skin on hers. All the babies in the neonatal intensive care unit died within hours. Christians gathered in their churches, but so did non-believers, thinking their devout neighbours might be better prepared. Not so, alas. In some places people were panicking about food. In others they were pretending not to. The staff at a Salvadorian restaurant in Harlem grilled food in the street, handing it out for free. Only 24 hours in, most people stopped listening to the archaic radios and expecting to understand. Was this a test of faith? It affirmed only their faith in their ignorance. People locked doors and windows and played board games with their families, though a mother in St. Charles, Maryland, drowned her 2 daughters in the bathtub, which struck her as far more sensible than a round of chutes and ladders. That game required neither skill nor strategy. All it had to teach was that life was the mostly unearned advantage or devastating fall. It took unimaginable courage to kill your children. Few people could manage it. I'm not advocating suicide or killing your kids in the event of a disaster like this, but I can understand the absolute helplessness most people are going to feel if this scenario ever actually happens. If there's a blackout across most of the United States with probable atomic warfare, even on a small scale, the absolute loss of civilization would be so devastating to many, many people, they would find it impossible to move forward from it and would prefer to exit. But also the truth is, as the narrator points out, only a minority like Rose are actually going to survive. I think it's great if the book actually had no end. I think it's great if the book actually had no hope for the future. But alas, there is a little bit of hope in here, a tiny piece. The next generation of these deer would be born white as the unicorn in those Flemish tapestries that Rose and her family would never see. Not albinism, the one geneticist who worked it out would discover, but intergenerational trauma. Life was like that. Life was about change. The fact the future has a geneticist, and that geneticist, he or she, has the time to figure this out, is hope. But in the here and now, some of the nearby locals got into their cars and drove towards the city. There were no police, so they sped. Brooklyn smelled. Spoilage in refrigerated cases gone warm. Garbage accreting on the corners or wherever. Plus the trapped commuters. The bipolar homeless man, the press secretary to the mayor, the optimist who'd been heading to job interviews at Google, slowly becoming unclaimed corpses. Not always true. Definitely not true in all scenarios. For most scenarios, if you've got some safe place to go that's not inside a city or a suburb, you probably should go there as soon as you think there's a problem. Don't wait for confirmation. Get there, you can always come home again. Rose. She was not dumb. She did not expect salvation. She understood that alone they had nothing. Now they would have something, and it would be thanks to Rose. Rose is heading to that house that she and Archie saw. She's trying to do something. She couldn't know, she would never know, that the Thorns, the family who lived there, were at the airport in San Diego, unable to make arrangements since there were no flights operating domestically because of a nationwide emergency without precedent, as though precedent was required. The Thorns would never see this house again in their lives. though Nadine, the matriarch, would sometimes dream of it before she succumbed to cancer in one of the tent camps the army managed to erect outside the airport. They'd burn a body before they stopped bothering with that, as the bodies outnumbered the people left to do the burning. For those of you who are American, you might not know that San Diego is on the west coast of the United States. So far in the book, all we've been talking about is New York, Queens, Brooklyn, Long Island, East Coast, South Carolina. This is the first time in the book we're clearly told if we're thinking it's the entirety of the United States of America, not just the East Coast. We're also told that this is going to go on and on and on for years, and many, many people are going to die. Which is pretty much true. That's the way it's going to be. It's not going to be driving across the United States in your fast car to rescue your estranged wife and daughter, and then she'll be in love with you again. And then you'll have lots and lots of supplies and live happily ever after in the wasteland. True, absolute fall of civilization with no rebound immediately will kill hundreds of millions of people in the United States of America. Not straight away though. So Rose smashes her way into the house through a glass that's already been cracked by the noise. She's not giving up. Her normalcy bias has been suspended, but she went into every room, opened every closet, pulled back the shower curtains, knelt to look beneath the beds. Rose is systematically going through that house looking to see what she can take to use or what she can leave there and then use later on. This is smart. This is really, really early on. This is before the Dannies of the area have decided, oh my gosh, this is still going on. I better check out the neighborhood cottages and see if there's anything I can steal. Rose is getting in there really early. Rose is smart. Rose is a survivor. She went back to the den and switched on the television. The screen was blue. Rose opened the cabinet beneath it and found the PlayStation and dozens of plastic boxes holding various games and dozens of DVDs. They didn't have a player at their house, but there was one in the classroom, and she wasn't stupid. She decided on Friends. They had the whole box set. It was the episode where Rose fantasized about Princess Leia. The sound of the television made her feel so much better. She turned the volume loud to keep her company as she ransacked. Band-Aids, Advil, a package of batteries. These were the treasure, but it was meant as proof. I think Rose is about 12, and this is totally typical behaviour. I think it's great that she knows this is real. I think it's great she realises that her parents are pretty much useless, and I think she realises that Archie's down for the count, and he's also somewhat useless. She knows she has to adapt. She adapts immediately. There's a house over there. I'm going to it. I'm going to knock on the door, see if they can help us. If there's nobody there, I'm going to break in. I'm going to take what we can use in the here and now and take it back, because the power is still on in my place, but it may not be on for very long. Under which as well, the only way this is actually possible if there's a very small hydro power station that's actually generating power that's feeding into them, or if there's actually a secret government bunker nearby on the same system. They don't actually lose power. They're extremely fortunate. Over time you'd expect them to lose power, but they were lucky. They actually maintained power when everybody else lost it, and that's a force multiplier that they're failing to use. So 241 pages later, we've reached the last paragraph. They didn't know how it would end, with night, with more terrible noise from the top of Olympus, with bombs, with disease, with blood, with happiness, with deer or something else watching them from the darkened woods. Well, wasn't that true of every day? Excellent book. I enjoyed it. Fairly good read. Lots of aha moments in it for me. The stereotypes of the characters made it very clear to me how people would react in a major disaster. Feel free to read the book and leave me your comments below. I think it's fascinating. Please remember this is a review of the book, not of the film. I have no interest in your comments on the film right now. There will be another video after I watch the film where I actually talk about what I think the differences are and what's stronger and weaker in the film compared to the book. And by all means, if you want to talk about the film on that one, please feel free. I know it has generated a lot of both positive and negative buzz, but from what I've seen from the clips, I don't think I'm going to like it, but you never know. This is an A for me, not an A+. I do recommend you read it. I really enjoyed it. So if you feel like giving me a subscription, please do. Otherwise, I'll keep making videos like this. Have a great day. Toodles. Oh, fill your bathtubs full of water. Now. This has been a 2024 Wolfie Terry's Had a Treat production.
Thank you.